Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalvarowski, and as always, the yang to my yin is here, Susan Hobson. Susan, how are you?
I am actually levitating today. Can you notice a difference in my state? Just out of curiosity.
You're juiced up today. Must be the lack of coffee that's running in your
Well, that
veins.
one might think that that would create the opposite effect in said state, but no, I've just been having the best meditations this week. I don't know if it has
Good.
to do with this vitamin D that's finally showing up outside my window, or the fact that we're going down to our spiritual retreat in a couple of weeks and we're starting to gear up for that. But yeah, I'm just feeling so freaking good. How about you, sir?
Amazing. Me, I haven't been sleeping well, so it's been a little bit not great, but the other stuff's coming together, and actually, we'll talk about it a little bit, but our special guest today, Kevin Carton, through his podcast, I found a new therapist, and I've had a few sessions with her, and it's been pretty insightful, and so I'm looking forward to get a little bit deeper. And actually, speaking of Kevin's show as well, Sunny Strasburg, which we're going to her retreat in a few weeks, she actually introduced Kevin and I together, and so that's what led to all of this magic that's happening now.
It all comes together in the end.
Absolutely. And so before we get to Kevin, we have to start off with a quote.
Oh, yeah.
And I have one here from Pablo Picasso, which is kind of
Ooh.
a fun.
Yeah. Is that what the shirt's all about this morning?
I'm an artistic guy.
I love that you just said that. Tell us more, Rob.
it's a joke. So half of my mom's side of the family, actually my aunt is actually a professional artist and has been forever.
Mhm.
She's in the Gallery of Canada and that thing. But it's the joke is her half of the family is very artsy folks, and then it's like the Kalvarowskis are not artistic at all, and that's where I fell in the gene pool.
The science and the spirituality, right?
Absolutely. And so we got to get to the quote here. And so we
Oh, yeah.
have, and Pablo says, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away.
I love that quote so much. Tell us why you picked it today, though.
Oh, of course I picked it. I picked it because of our special guest. Our special guest, as I mentioned, is Kevin Carton, transformational life coach and the host of the Science and Spirituality podcast. And something, if you go on Kevin's website, kevincarton.com, it literally says on the front, helping people find and work their purpose. And
Mm.
so, why don't we start there? Kevin, what do you think about the quote?
I love it. I thought you were actually going to share some other quote from Pablo Picasso, where I forget, this is a paraphrase, but he speaks about how any painting he would create first began as a dream. It had to begin in imagination first. And so
Mm,
imagination is just as real as reality. Because I think the quote is that first he dreams his painting and then he paints his dream. So I love that. I love that quote. And it's a fantastic beginning to this conversation.
amazing. And so, Kevin, for folks out there who are new to you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you end up becoming a transformational life coach?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. So this connects to my podcast that I co-host with my brother, and the title we chose, Science and Spirituality. So I'm at heart a scientist. I began my career path I chose at first was to pursue my doctorate in pharmacy. And that career path I loved, I enjoyed because love science. I still do love science to this day. But after 4 years in that path, it was a 6 year long doctorate, which was an accelerated path for some because usually you get your 4 year undergrad and then 4 years of doctorates. But for me, it was 6 years. And about 4 years in, 3.5 years in, really, but it took me up until my fourth year to make this decision. I started to feel disheartened with that career path because I started working at a community pharmacy in New York where I grew up. And I started to see after month after month after month being a pharmacy tech and intern there that many people, not all, but many people were coming back with the same issues. And it seemed like we were treating symptoms rather than the underlying causes of people's illnesses, their diseases, the challenges they were going through. And not only did I pick that career path because I love science, but I also wanted to help people. And so as I started to see that we weren't really helping people to a large degree, I started to feel a loss of purpose there. And so it was several months of just back and forth of should I stay in this career path or should I leave and find something new? So the final point of the decision moment for me was when I failed a required pharmacy course to continue on in my doctorate path. And I knew why. I was a straight A and B student up until that point, until I started to feel like this wasn't for me. I didn't study very well, and then I got a C minus, which it was technically passing to get my 4-year degree, which I'm proud that I did get a 4-year bachelor's, but I failed technically the requirement to continue on in the doctorate path. So that was a moment to make a decision to follow my heart and follow what I think was my purpose at the time, even though I wasn't aware of what really I wanted to do or how I would help people in a different way. But I just knew it wasn't for me in pharmacy. So it was a clear indication for me. It was a no to that and a yes to something else, which is very scary to say yes to. I didn't know what, but felt it in my heart there was something. And there's an age old saying where it says, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And 2 days later, I found my mentor, who I've worked with now for a decade. So it was a very interesting, journey to get to this point, but that's what sparked this whole path, which it took a few more years in actually studying with my mentor to even discover that I wanted to become a transformational life coach myself.
Mhm.
And Kevin, tell our folks a little bit about what that means, just in case
Mm,
they're hearing the word transformational and they're hearing the word coach, but they don't
yeah.
necessarily understand what that pertains to,
That's a
perhaps.
great question. Yes. So if we take the word transformation, I love words and the meaning behind them if we break them apart. So transform. Just means to go beyond. And then form is what we're talking about is just any physical form or physical reality, physical experience you're having in your life right now. So transformation is literally going one form of experience, your current reality, to a completely different reality that you may have as a dream or an idea in your mind that may seem like it's impossible or not probable based on your current circumstances or conditions. Because a lot of us get stopped from even accepting our dreams or our
Mhm.
visions of what we really want to create because there's no evidence around us of it being possible yet. So that's
Mhm.
transformation. And then coaching is just helping coach people through those blocks, those very difficult times of making that transition.
And how do you incorporate spirituality and science into that transformational process?
Yeah, well, spirituality for me is the basis of it all because in my belief, we are spirit, we are a soul, we're a spiritual being having this human experience. And so, what we may desire, what we may dream of, it comes from spirit. It comes from our true longing from our soul of what we want to create in this lifetime. So, I believe that we have incarnated into this human experience to create something new that has never been created before, maybe in our experience, or maybe that the world has ever seen before. And that comes from that part of us that is who we really are as a soul. So spirituality for me is the basis of it all. And science to me just backs up all of the amazing inspiration that comes from spirit. So science, especially now, and this is why I stay a scientist at heart, quantum physics is proving so many amazing things that spirituality has been touting for thousands of years. And one of the key aspects is what I just mentioned, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And one particular aspect of this that I'll share, a scientific approach, more of a psychology approach, but
Mhm.
psychology is a
Human
very well
sciences.
accepted
Mhm.
scientific side of this,
Mhm.
is metacognition. That's one of the primary tools that I use in my coaching as well as in my own life. And metacognition simply means that we notice what we're noticing, or in other words, we become the observer. And to me, like when I first heard this concept back in 2014, it blew my mind because I had a sense of this, I had a feeling of this, but I didn't know the right words or the actual approach to this, of how to actually get in touch with who I am as a soul. And metacognition is the tool because if we really take a scientific, logical approach to this, if we can notice our thoughts, we can notice our body, if we can notice our emotions, and then notice that we can notice those thoughts, emotions in our body, then that is proof to me that we are not those things. And we
Mhm,
have those things. And we even use our language
mhm,
to denote that. We don't even realize we're doing it. But from a very young age, like we don't say like, oh, this is me, like referring to our hand. Like let's say, God forbid, I lose a hand. I don't say I lost me. I say I lost my hand. There's possession there. And that
mhm,
possession carries over even to those more subtle aspects of our nature, our human nature, which is our thoughts and our emotions. We say, I had that thought. I've had this thought, or my thoughts are running wild. Like, well, again, it's my thought and my
mhm.
emotion. So that's that's the kind of like point that they intersect, I see.
Yeah. Kevin, I'm curious, like you mentioned, there was that moment where you knew you had to pivot, but you were still, there was that uncertainty around what is it going to look like or what's it going to become or all those things. How did you connect to the trust that you needed to make that leap?
Mm, that's such a great question. I've been asked that question many, many times after many times of sharing my story. I feel like my answer changes, or at least there's several answers that I can give because, I started studying personal development and self-help for about a year and a half before I ended up making that decision to leave. It was part of the catalyst of me even having the courage because as I started to study the workings of our human mind, our own human potential and the power that we have within, and also the potential to create whatever we want to create. I started to consider as like, well, yeah, been in this career path for so long, or it's 4 years at that point. At that point, at 21 years old, that felt like a long time, because four
Yeah,
years of time was like 20% of my life.
yeah.
But you know, the study had helped build that courage because I'd read of stories, I've heard of stories, I started watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts at that time, and I knew it was possible for others. So I started to build up that belief in myself that it could be possible for me, even though I've not done something like this yet of making a big change. So that courage definitely was built up just through study and just hearing other people's stories. Because it's quite irrational for us to make decisions without having at least some inspiration or some idea of it could be possible for us. So that was a big, big help. But then I also, another aspect of it, I had really supportive people in my life, even though they didn't agree with my decision. And like I talked with my parents and my brothers and my friends about this inkling of me leaving that career path. Many of them were like, nah, that doesn't sound like it's a smart idea. But since I kept coming back to it, they're supportive of me since they loved me, even though they were a bit scared and for my own security and not making a mistake in my life. But that was definitely a big help too.
And when you say that the knowingness came from your heart, can you speak a little bit
Mm,
about what that internal guidance
yes.
was like, or what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love this topic because to bring in some science to this, there's actually some scientific research and study and proof that the heart is actually a really powerful insight of information, not just a feeling, but there's actually information that is there that can actually be really useful and helpful for us. Because a lot of us in more modern or Western societies, we often use our head a bit too much. Like it's like
Mhm,
we've made that as like the king of our existence versus like marrying the two of the heart and the mind. Because I see it as
mhm,
a kind of like a yin and yang kind of a dynamic or a relationship.
mhm,
But for me, it was just a feeling. It was a feeling, but I'll get back to the science in a moment. But to answer your question, what that feeling was just this pull towards something. Like it was I'll say it this way. If I just wrote down a list, which I actually did, wrote down a list of the pros and cons of leaving and then the pros and cons of staying in that career path, there were way more pros to staying in that career path and then way more cons to leaving. So if I just left it up to my mind and logic, then I would have stayed. But
mhm,
I knew I wasn't happy there, even in the study. And then I imagined out, like let's say I was imagining like 2, 3, 4 years in the future, and imagine myself being a pharmacist, and imagine myself doing the work that I was seeing the pharmacist doing, that I was supporting as an intern. I just felt like this drop in my heart. Like I felt like it just like was soul crushing in a way. So there was a feeling. But to get back to the science, The Heart Math Institute has done incredible research about the heart and the
Mhm.
power it has. Because, I mean, quite literally, now we know that it is the center point, the beginning of our electromagnetic energy field that we live in. We quite literally live in this energy field around us. Our physical body is not all the totality of who we are. I actually believe we are more than our physical body. Our physical body actually lives within us, within who we are as a soul. So anyway, the science, the research says that our heart actually sends more information to the brain than the brain actually sends to the heart. It's flipped.
Wow. That
So
is significant.
exactly. But again, we have to, I think the shift is that we have to honor our feelings. It sounds
Mhm.
so like fluffy in a way, but now with more research, it's much more solid. There's a much greater basis of foundation for following those feelings because
Mhm.
that feeling is intelligent and that feeling will guide us to a certain path, to a certain life. And really the question becomes then, what kind of life do you want to live? Do you want to live a life that's more aligned with logic and makes sense? Or do you want to live a life aligned with your heart, aligned with love, aligned with inspiration and greater expansion for your life? And usually that comes from your heart and your feeling rather than what logic says.
That's interesting because I see so many of my clients like walking through the door, like, I want to find my purpose. Help me find my purpose. Right. And like when I start to get into some of the spiritual aspects of how we think about purpose, right? And how we can actually work to find our purpose using that intuitive intelligence. I feel like that oftentimes, especially with a high achiever leader, is where I have a hard time like getting them to trust that process. So I'm curious because you talked about this in terms of personal development. And I know leaders are very much aware of the fact that they need to personally develop in 2024, but why should they be considering just how beneficial it can be to incorporate the spirituality approach to their leadership
Mm.
development? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is it goes back to my point of view on life is that that's the foundation of life itself. Like it, this is going to take a kind of a broad approach, but promise I'll land it back to the point in your question. But if we take a look at the creation of this entire universe that we live in, there's two approaches, science and spirituality. The science approach is that it's the Big Bang that created all things. But even if we just look at that approach, that's the most widely accepted theory of the beginning of our entire universe. That began from what scientists would say was an infinitesimally small point of matter that it contained everything. There was this oneness that began it all, right? So some may say is like a more materialistic approach is like, all right, that was all there. But even if it was, like, how is it possible for everything that has been created now and has evolved to this point to be in this one tiny, tiny point of matter? I don't believe that that was technically possible. I take more of like a blended approach because the other approach, the spiritual approach, is that God created the universe. And even in the Christian Bible, it says God said, "Let there be," and then started to describe, right? Let there be light, let there be earth, let there be animals and firmament, all these different things. But I like to bring those two together. That what if there was that point of, the very, very small point of matter that contained everything, but what if there was spirit that was actually creating that to bring that forth, and then boom, everything was created, and then evolution took its course. So whatever approach you take, it actually doesn't matter because we, as human beings, are a creation of whatever was at the beginning. And so when you ask the question, like, why would someone take that approach? Well, I think it's the most, to bring some logic into this, I think it is the most logical thing to accept that there is more to this life than just what we can think or what we can, experience in our human life. That there are spiritual aspects to our nature. And it's, I believe, is who we really are, that we're a spirit moved into form. So why someone would want to take this? Well, if that resonates, then that's all the reasoning I think there is or needs to be. And I'm not one to try to convince someone, but if this does light someone up or like interest them, it's like, that sounds interesting, then I'd say that would be a why to the point.
And Kevin, how do we start connecting to that wisdom or the intelligence in the heart?
Mm. It's a lot of letting go in my experience because that wisdom of the heart is there always. And There's a great quote because a lot of people consider that wisdom of the heart or like the messages from the heart as intuition. And intuition could also be called inspiration that comes from like out of the blue, quote unquote. And I love a quote from Mahatma Gandhi where he says, the voice of truth, which was his wording for inspiration or intuition, the voice of truth speaks to every single one of us every single day. And it's as loud as our willingness to listen. And so I draw inspiration from that is always there. And so really the work is letting go of the doubts, the skepticism, the wondering, oh, is this really inspiration? Is this really a message for me? Especially if it goes against what we're logically thinking. Like again, going back to that pros and cons list that we can often look at when it comes to a decision to make. So a lot of it is letting go and recognizing those doubts or that skepticism and just try it out. I'd say like that's my first approach I would take myself and what I help my clients do too, because that doubt kills more dreams than failure ever could. I think that's a quote
Right?
from Napoleon Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. I
It's
second that. Yeah.
it's so interesting, Kevin. There's an expression in psychedelic therapy or a mantra that I love, and it's trust, be open, let go. And it's something that the more I hear it, the more I'm like, I really resonate with this. And then, but there's also, I just want for folks out there, right? It's not about just like not doing anything,
Mm,
right?
yes.
But it's allowing the inspiration and the love to be your path versus the fear of not good enough, I need more, all the beliefs that we're conditioned with.
I
Love
totally
that.
agree. Beautifully said.
I want to talk about this because I was just referencing the purpose piece, right? I feel like
Mm,
we've got more people than ever looking to find their purpose thanks to this beautiful disruption that we just had a couple of years ago or a year ago. But I'm curious on your perspective on whether or not you can go looking for purpose or if purpose needs to come looking for you. And I'll share a little bit about my story and why I'm curious to understand yours.
yeah. I think it's a bit of both
Yeah.
because that curiosity, I think, opens the path or opens the doorways for us to discover.
Mhm.
But it does, I think, find us or it comes to us. But I want to add a different word I'd recommend. And this is just my perspective because personally, I'm not a fan of the word find because
Mm.
going back to just the definition of words, and I love using words are
Mhm.
powerful. Words are an
Mhm.
energy vibration that we use a word, then we start to think and feel and act along those lines of what we've just said. So when we use the word find, it denotes the opposite of experience, which is there's something lost, like it's not there,
Lack.
right?
Mhm.
Exactly, lack. So personally, I like to use the word discover because if you
Mm.
hyphenate that word discover, I personally believe that's exactly what's going on is that you're taking off the covers of what's already within you, that there's a purpose that I think that each and every one of us have been given for this particular lifetime in this human experience, just as unique as our thumbprint. This I love this. When I first learned this in science, it was a forensic science class I took in high school, that we got to look at like all of our thumbprints and like the nuanced differences of each one of them. And our forensic scientist teacher said, literally every single human being on the planet for the entire history of humanity has had a different thumbprint than every single other human being. So there's no one alike at all, ever. It's impossible. So that uniqueness, I think, that's a physical example of that. I think there's a spiritual example of that, that we all have a unique soul print that we have been given and that we're here to then express. And there's similarities, I think, between a lot of our purposes in life, but there is uniqueness. And so it's a discovery process and a letting go or uncovering of that. So that, we can go into the semantics like, yeah, that's finding it, right? It's like you're finding that within yourself, but I personally like the word discover.
And does pain need to motivate that choice for human beings, or can we? Because I always joke and say my high achieving clients, they'll come whistling through my door like, hey, I just want to work on a little something, you know? It's like usually brick walls and glass ceilings that act as the catalyst for discovering that untapped potential. So
Yes.
in your experience, do you believe that it needs to be pain, or can pleasure also motivate us to discover our purpose?
I think it's both. However, usually it's just a more common path that pain starts that process, because
Mm-hmm.
pain often pushes us to make decisions that we wouldn't otherwise make. But the pleasure, as you call it, but I call it the pull to a desire. It's a pulling towards something that
Mm-hmm.
I think as we grow and become more aware that we could use that as a greater fire for ourselves. So I like to make this analogy that pain can be like the fuel to start the fire, but our vision or our dream, something we would love to create, is what pulls us forward and continues that fire going. It stokes the fire.
And I feel
What are
like,
you pulled
yeah.
to most now, Kevin?
Say it again.
Ooh.
What are you pulled most to now?
Hmm. You know, it's interesting. After years, I mean, I know I look young. I'm 31. I am young. I'm 31. But it's been a decade since I've been in mentorship with my mentor. I've been running my business for 6.5 years. And so now for myself, I'm way more pulled to allowing myself to have grace in my process of creation of what I do in my business and work and expanding my impact. Rather than when I first started my business was much more of a pushing, like go, go, go. I want to do this thing and like make this impact. Whereas now I allow myself to be more guided, and that's what's pulling me forward, is to be more in tune with the subtle messages that I'm receiving every day from God, from spirit, from the universe, from source. So whatever label you'd like to put it, that's what's most pulling to me. And that shows up in the different aspects of my work, like clients I work with, or my podcast with my brother, having more guests on. But honestly, it's more peace, looking for more peace. That's what's pulling me right now in my life.
I love that. How would you work with a client who is obviously coming to you because they want to discover their purpose? Like, and let's just say said client has never stepped toe in the pool known as spirituality before. Like, how do you even introduce that type of work to somebody who's never experienced spirituality?
That's an amazing question, because actually I don't find that I work with people who have not really had at least some aspect of
Oh,
spirituality.
interesting.
Kevin's demo is
However,
different than ours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but that's a fantastic question, because that's a challenge. I would say it's like, well,
Yeah,
how would I?
yeah.
Um, I would start with a question. And a question being, and this question takes time to really dig into,
Hmm.
because I would say if someone has not really stepped into the world of spirituality yet, there could be a lot of skepticism that rises up, and
Hmm.
like the programming or the patterning of thinking that has served them well up into this point. And if they're coming to me, that means that there's something greater seeking to emerge. And so the question I would ask, it's deceptively simple, and I'll explain it or unpack it a bit more after I share it. But the simple question I would help a person begin is asking, what would you love? What would you love? Notice it's not a question saying, what do you think you should do? Or what is your purpose? Because that I think is a little bit too far on the deep end of really
Hmm.
asking. Because again, it's not a question I think you can come up with an answer at. It's a discovery process, like I said. So, what would you love starts to open the heart. It starts to go beyond the mind. It allows someone to drop from the mind into the heart, because the word love is a vibration that connects literally with the heart, versus what do you think and then fill in the blank, like it's obviously the head. And it opens the heart because you start to reconnect with what lights you up, what gives you more life, what do you feel drawn to. And that is a very approachable question for anyone, because we can ask that question in day-to-day life. It doesn't have to be this whole grand question of what would you love to create for your life? What's your dream? Like, it's just what would you love? But what would you love in this moment? Could be like, well, I would love to be outside in nature. I'd love to get into the sun. I'd love to hang out with my friends. I would love to, go on that bike ride. I would love to take that vacation. Like, and so on and so forth. There's probably other things that would rise up, but love opens the door to then start to get into that pattern of thinking in that way, which is kind of a paradox. And interestingly enough, when I say like it's thinking in that way because yes, it's a thought, but you're really engaging the heart. You're marrying the two of the brain and the heart to answer that question.
Love that. What if they can't get into the heart? Because as Rob's mentioned, I think we might
Mm,
have slightly different target demographics, but a lot of the high achievers that we see walking through our door, we know high achievers, they run on the maladaptive strategies. So it's oftentimes informed by trauma, and trauma can really disconnect us from our heart and our capacity to even be able to envision anything in the future on the horizon.
right.
So what would we do with that type of person?
Definitely go into meditation or relaxation practices
Tell
because
us why.
when we get relaxed, when we allow our nervous system to just be and to create more of a state of homeostasis, to be at ease, if you may,
Mhm.
that starts to allow the heart to open and the mind to actually pick up the quote unquote thoughts of the heart. Because otherwise, it's just this, the fight or flight response, like the looking toward like survival or safety versus, what the heart wants is that actually not safety, it's expansion, it's growth, it's excitement, it's adventure. And that is often shut down by those, mental or the the
The
nervous system
the
response.
amygdala for the most part.
Exactly. Yes. Oh man, if we want to go there, I can talk about that all day. Like the way the brain works when the amygdala is activated. But
Right?
yeah,
The
so the
reptile. Mhm.
exactly. So yeah, the relaxation uh activates that ability to stay open. And in fact, there's an entire book. I only just recently found this. It's called The Relaxation Response. It was written like the 70s or 80s.
Mhm.
And it was just a whole work, a whole book upon the opposite of the fight or flight response. And there's incredible research that shows that there's power, literal power that comes through when you are relaxed, which is such a paradox because especially if someone's very much in the mind and activated and like just like, oh, I gotta go, go, go and do things. Relaxation seems like, oh, then I'm not gonna get anything done, or I'm not gonna, discover my purpose or make progress. But it's actually the complete opposite. We make way more progress, we're way more creative, we have way more capacity for ideas to move forward on when we are in a relaxed state.
Yeah, speed up by slowing down. I love that
Yes,
one.
exactly.
Yeah. And again, it's really hard for a high achiever to trust that, right? Because what
Hmm.
they think is motivation, woo, like the pedal to
Hmm.
the metal, and is actually hyper arousal in their nervous system. It's a stress response. And yeah, that's hard when it comes to trying to go and grow or lead somebody towards growth. If
Exactly.
they right, if they can even get safe enough on the inside to be able to open up their brain's resources to play with.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I love that answer because that's exactly how we would entertain that as well, right, Rob? The state management piece.
Yeah, just few notes or things to consider, right? Is like for folks out there, like trauma causes hyperarousal, right?
Mhm.
And the reason is your brain, if you haven't done therapy or processed the trauma, your brain literally thinks the trauma is happening in this present moment, hence why these
Fight or flight.
why you're in that state. And
Mhm.
so if you feel this way, and like Susan, I had trouble meditating, I had trouble doing this relaxation work. For some folks, like literally go to therapy or and get medication is a great answer for this. Obviously, consult mental health professionals, but it's it's sometimes a great way because that will help you learn to parachute down,
Mhm.
and then you can start, like I meditate now, right? But it's like then you can start to use the tools when you've healed a lot of that trauma. So just that's a mental health note over here.
Mhm. An important one at that. I have a curious question. I have a whole bunch of curious questions, but the thing I want to really ask you the most while I have you in studio, Kevin, is like a lot of people have been coming to me these days asking about this terminology, the spiritual awakening. I've had a lot of clients over the
Mm.
last month
Mhm.
actually ask me about that concept. What does that concept mean to you? What is the
Mm.
spiritual awakening?
I'll share my answer, but I'm very curious to hear your answer too. So
Yeah.
my answer is, spirituality as just a definition is the awareness of spirit, which is beyond the human. Well,
Mhm.
and quote unquote beyond, because I mean, spirit is quite literally infused in every cell of our being. It's life itself. It's what creates life. So a spiritual awakening to me is the awakening of the awareness that we are spirit. It is as simple as that. And many people have a spiritual awakening in different ways. In fact, to go back to what we were talking about of pain driving us to a purpose,
Mhm.
I mean, usually pain is actually what causes a spiritual awakening for many, many people.
Mhm.
So that's one way, but a spiritual awakening can also be a gradual awakening, an opening, an awareness that grows gradually over time.
Mhm.
And again, it's really just coming to awareness that we are spiritual beings having this
Mhm.
human experience, which I think no matter what, even if it's a gradual awakening or if it's that kind of like shock of awakening through pain, it's
Mhm.
still in some ways a shock to the human system, human body,
Mhm.
because we realize, oh my God, I am not my thoughts, my emotions, my physical body. Like I'm not even my name. My
Mhm.
name was given to me. In fact, people change their name all the time. And it
Mhm.
doesn't, people accept that. Like I had a friend who changed her name from Claudia to Sky and then back to that. So like, that we often so connect and so like only identify as our personality, as our name, as what we've done, our thoughts, all of that. Like the spiritual awakening is realizing that we're not those things. We have those things, part of our human experience, but we are truly spirit. So that to me is what spiritual awakening is.
I love that answer. Yeah, I think the way I've been describing it to my clients, because they definitely know how I approach working on purpose. See my son in the background here, but purpose-driven
Nice.
mission is what it's all about. But that's when I had my spiritual awakening. And the way I've described that is this moment where I realized that everything was happening for a reason, right? And that
Mm,
there was a purpose to every single aspect of what was happening, even the pain. So it's what I was saying a second ago in terms of where I feel like I really had what you were describing in your heart, like that intuition where you just knew that all of this was not exactly what it was supposed to be or necessarily what it was all about. So and this is why I asked about the pain part because, yeah, I believe that pain is oftentimes what awakens us to our purpose. Because when I lost my father my first year away at university, suddenly to terminal cancer, and I was like, why is this, happening to me? And then I
mm,
all of a sudden overnight got connected with a mindset person like me now, and I got introduced to the work, and then I had all of this really deep overnight sense of knowing that all of what was happening for me, not to me, right? That was a reason why I was experiencing a lot of the pain that I'd experienced so far upstream in my journey. It was because I was meant to do something with that. I was meant to bring that to the world in some way, shape, or form. And so that's what I think about a spiritual awakening as being like that moment where you really start to have that higher level of consciousness where you realize, right? Like the method to the madness in terms of why we're here.
hmm
I think of Joseph Campbell when I think about this, the hero's
Yes.
journey, right? Like he is the first one who really came on the scene in psychology talking about things from this lens. Do you resonate with his work? Do you resonate with his theory, right? That we all kind of got to go through that gauntlet and then experience that pain so that we understand what that pain is there to teach us about why we're here, about who we are, why we're having those experiences, and what all of that was meant to teach us about what we're meant to do with it. You resonate with his work?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got his book in my library behind me.
Okay,
The
wonderful.
Hero
So
with a Thousand Faces. Yeah.
I'm speaking your language, but yeah, like I think of that as the moment where my spirit stopped having amnesia, and all of
Mm,
a sudden now, like that was my relationship with self. My relationship with self was informed by that higher level knowingness.
hmm
Yeah.
Amazing.
I think that resonates a lot with our clients again, because I think when they come through our door, it's a lot of that. Like, why is it happening to me? Like it's, they don't know what to do with it. And
hmm
I always like to say, like, I, as a spiritual being, do not believe in useless suffering. I immediately get curious because I know it's like, you know what? Like something really good's happening in your life because it's awakening you to actually come into this table to
Yes.
have this conversation about why you're here. There's purpose even just right there on the play.
Mm-hmm.
But for our crowd, right, Rob, I feel like it really serves them to understand the purpose buried in the pain. What are your thoughts over there, buddy? I see you deep in contemplation, and I recognize that state from a mile away. How is that resonating with you?
Well, the first thing, what Kevin said about love is this. I'm loving this discussion.
I know you are. I can
And we
tell.
need to book Kevin like
feel it.
another 12 episodes in a row.
That's
But
what you're.
it's actually interesting.
Yeah.
So obviously the last few weeks I've been in ketamine therapy, and a few things actually happened for me. And one of them was literally what Kevin said, is this moment of seeing self as not an individual, but as basically because I do a lot of IFS, right? I saw it as an infinite number of parts. And self was sort of like the kind of like governing globe around all these parts. And I think that was very insightful in the way that you can show up in any one of these or multiples, and it's not good or bad, it just is.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I saw last time was it was this feeling of knowingness, and how there was the feeling of everything that I've done and have, been through, and all these things have all culminated in me being in this moment for a reason. And there was a shock and wonderment and that level of just incredibility, whatever that word is. But just amazement of how that was designed to have me here in this moment for a specific thing.
Mhm.
And I think it's hard for me to describe this to folks, but I think ultimately what it's done for me is it's helped me with that peace inside, is navigating with less of the internal battle of the one part and the other part, or hey, the fear and the love, or the want more and should, or the all these things. And I think ultimately that is where I land with it. And at the first retreat I went to with Dick and Sonny, I asked a really wise, he didn't even call himself a coach, but he said, I asked him, like, what is spirituality? Like, what's the point of all of this? Like, I don't get it. And he said to me, he's like, Rob, spirituality is just everyone wants to feel safe and loved and warm like they did in the womb. And that's the best way I've heard it described.
So that sense of wholeness or oneness as it relates to the womb, right? And when we first came to be, the manifestation of our energy in the womb, when we first came to be, that's his understanding of spirituality.
I think he means the feeling.
The feeling of wholeness and connection to source.
And love and peace and safety and all these things.
Yeah, that's how I recognize source energy.
Yeah, and then as we get screaming into the world,
ejected into the cold, harsh world. I know.
We're all trying to get back there.
I know. Well, we talk about that in our work too, right? Like, because in our work, what's really unique, Kevin, is that we really kind of flip leadership development on its side by starting with the self. We start with self-leadership. We don't even think you should work on how to lead your people effectively. until
Mm,
you can get into alignment with some of that yourself, right? Because the
yes.
model carries the most weight. And so, yeah, I think about that in terms of our process, right? Like it really is all about helping a leader just understand like how to get into that state of congruency and alignment in themselves so that they actually then have the model that can create that type of team environment and cohesion for their teams and their people, right? So yeah, I have to be careful with some of the leaders that I work with when they're like super duper duper like 2D or 3D and that they, just don't even want to talk about it. They call themselves atheists or whatever. But
Mm.
you don't necessarily need to use spiritual language when you're actually coaching a leader in a really spiritual way, do you? Let's talk about this one for a second. Or do you? Should I make that a question? Because when I'm working with the leader, the way I try to make the case is I put it into neuroscience because it's empirical and it's it's hardcore evidence. I talk about intuitive intelligence, right? I talk about the smartest part of you, the sixth sense. Like, what leader doesn't want to have that in their toolbox, right? In terms of their capacity to be able to make really high level decisions and create innovative things in their business. So yeah, I don't even necessarily think that you need to use the linguistics of spirituality to coach a leader in this way. What do you guys think about that?
That makes me think of Thomas Edison and the Wright brothers and um, any inventor
Mm,
is to get really like practical and
totally.
historic example.
Yeah,
Where did those ideas come from?
yeah.
I believe they came from the infinite mind that knows all things.
Mhm.
And,
Right.
again, that might get a bit more spiritual, but just even staying focused on those examples is that
Yeah.
they activated their brain to draw in ideas from the ether
Hmm.
that would work for what they were wanting to create. And that has
Hmm.
never been created before. And even for some, like the Wright brothers, there were people who had said, if God meant for humans to fly, then God would have given us wings. They had
Hmm.
so much backlash, and yet they stayed true to their course and then discovered those ideas and drew them in. And makes me think of Napoleon Hill's work. There's a chapter in the classic Think and Grow Rich titled "The Brain,"
Hmm. Hmm.
and in that chapter, he speaks about how our brain is both a broadcasting and receiving station for thought.
Hmm.
So if we want to draw in new ideas, then it's
Hmm.
about getting aligned with ourselves and then getting aligned with that idea and knowing it's possible, knowing it's there, and that you're open to receive that.
And we need that type of leadership more than we've ever needed in human history, don't we, gentlemen? Right? We need some new ideas here. The path that we're on surely is not that highly sustainable now, is it? So this is
Agreed.
why I feel like whether you're using spiritual language or not, to me, it's like not the point. The point is that we need to create the conditions in our self leadership so that we actually can access the resources to be able to create better ideas and innovations, right? So that we can lead ourselves to that new earth or that new realm of possibility that where humanity is actually healthy and happy and sustainable.
Just it. It's so we don't get murdered by the robots.
That is not where I was going to go with that at all. But no, like clearly we talk a lot about this. This is Rob's passion, is talking about toxic leadership, right? And we just had a
Mhm.
guest on before you who was talking about how 89% of Americans say that they've experienced high levels of stress and burnout over the last year. Like we're in a crisis point. We need to have higher levels of intelligence to work with, surely more than just what we know. We can't keep rinsing and repeating and recycling these ideas. We need better ideas, better, higher quality ideas. And to me, that's got to come through that intuitive intelligence. So that's how I make that case. Kevin, I'm curious, what do you want your legacy to be? The legacy of all of this, bringing spirituality and science together so that we can change this world when the world needs it more than ever. What do you want the legacy of that work of yours to be?
I saw that question in the preparation for this and thinking about it. It's been a little while since I've actually had it at the forefront of my mind, but
Yeah.
I think this is what drives all that I do is that I would love to create a legacy where we are soul driven, that most people, not everyone, because that's everyone's choice. Like they get to make their own choice if they want to accept that and test it out as a hypothesis. And is this way of living
Mhm.
healthy or just expansive for me? Does it work for me? But I believe it's possible, and I think this is where we're going, that more and more people, and I'd say the majority of people, recognize that they are souls living this human experience so that we can create more peace on earth. And let me define that really quick though, too, because I had this as a dream before I ever got into personal development, before I ever embarked on this path of personal development and starting my own business and being a coach. But when I was in my teens, I'd remember I wanted to see peace on earth. But I think back then I had a naive approach to it where like everyone was at peace and there was no fighting. I don't think that's the case of what is the possibility and what actually is the highest form of quote unquote peace on earth. I think it's where, yeah, there's going to be conflicts. There's going to
Mhm.
be disagreements because we're living in a sea of 8+ billion people with all having their own ideas and let alone like cultures of ideas and
Mhm.
nations of ideas. So we're going to have our different differences, but I don't believe that it has to result to physical violence. So I think that's a possibility. And especially when we start to really realize ourselves as souls and to make one other final point, which you were actually speaking to as well, Susan, that we're all connected. Everything is connected. And that's what I was mentioning very much earlier on in this conversation that quantum physics is now proving, because there is that theory of the quantum field. And
Mhm.
there's more and more research to prove that that's the case, what's actually going on in our reality, that there is one energy, there's one field of energy that everything is connected to. And that in our soul, at our soul level, we are all connected. And so physically, like, clearly we're not connected physically. That's an impossibility because we're thousands of miles away as we're recording this. It's not about that kind of connection. There's a deeper level of connection. It's like, we're individual waves on the ocean of life, but if you go down deep enough, all is one. There's no difference between, one part of the ocean and the other. It's all connected. And so I see a future where there is that awareness. And then from that awareness, there's natural choices that are made by humans that let's not kill each other. As simple as that. So the simple, just to uh, summarize everything I just shared, I like to call it a soul legacy. I'd like to leave a legacy of a soul, of just that we are a soul and we're living in this sea of souls and that we're all connected.
Amazing.
Mhm.
For folks out there, if you want to connect with Kevin, kevincarton.com. I've dropped his Instagram and LinkedIn in the podcast notes, and wherever you're listening to the Leadership Launchpad, just search Science and Spirituality and hit subscribe. It's a great show. You'll be hearing me soonish.
Yes, it'll be
Well, we'll
coming out
see
the end of
whenever the
March.
podcast worlds align.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But of course, there's a lot of great ones in the archives, so definitely check that one out. And then for us, obviously, hit subscribe to Leadership Launchpad and head on over to elitehighperformance.com for all your leadership needs. Susan, where do you want to land the plane today?
I just have to thank Kevin for coming in to initiate our audience in the spirituality direction. I know that you and I, sir, are already on that path, but it sure is obvious after this interview why we want to take our crowd there, why we want to lead our people in that direction towards discovering what all this spirituality thing might actually bring to the mix of their Leadership 2.0 missions. Because to me, it's synonymous with Leadership 2.0 now, isn't it? Leadership 2.0, Kevin, is our mission to change the way the game's being played forever through heart-centric, human-centric, relationship-centric leadership best practices. And that's really what we're talking about here, folks. It's just a matter of linguistics. I'm an NLP gal, so it's all about resources, right? That we need to learn to activate and uncover in our experience so that we can bring that to the collective and be a part of that mission. Because I believe if you're alive in this lifetime, you were created to be a part of that mission too. How about you, sir?
Yeah, and for me, I want to just echo what Kevin said about metacognition. And it's really noticing. And that's the first path to the, or that's the first step to the entry, is noticing the feelings that you feel, the thoughts that you have, the things that you do and just noticing, are they serving you or not? And it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing like quitting your job or doing these things, right? That may or may not come. But it's just starting to make proactive choices about what gives you more love in that moment. And that's where ultimately you can change your life and ripple it to all the folks around you.
Mhm.
Kevin, this was an absolutely incredible interview, and we're definitely going to have you back for
Oh
probably a
yeah, I got
2-hour
so
one.
many more questions for Kevin.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation too. Y'all are great interviewers.
Oh, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
So much
And folks
fun.
out there, I really hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did, and
Mhm.
we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.